Okay, so welcome to this session on the computer science lab updates. We have Devon Blewett here, who's going to walk us through the project that he is currently working on, the first part of the project. So Devon, over to you.
Thank you. My name is Devon Blewett. I'm a former lab instructor with the University of Regina CS Labs. I taught CS 100 roughly 5 years, and in the last term I taught CS 210. The project I'm talking about today is going to be an update overall to the quality of our lab pages, better usability, better content. Essentially, our programming-based courses are divided into a class and a lab component where the class teaches theory, our lab teaches hands-on coding exercises. So our labs are very important to the success of our students because being able to actually write is probably a lot more important than knowing the theory behind it for a lot of classes. Unfortunately, our labs have been having a bit of trouble with staying up to date. We have 3 to 4 lab instructors and 10 labs and a couple thousand students. So it's quite hard to manage both teaching and our labs at the same time, which is where this project came in, was that we brought in some extra help to work and update these labs to take some of the pressure off of our other instructors. So when we started working on this project, we divided our project into a certain amount of goals. And our first goal was to improve usability, because having good lab pages is not very helpful if you can't use them. So when we consider usability requirements for our courses, we need to consider that CS introductory courses might have a bit of a different audience than a lot of other courses, because we are a requirement for a lot of students that don't want anything to do with computers or programming in the first place, but they have to take it. So you get students from maybe psychology that are being forced to take a programming class. We get students who've never used a computer before. We get students who don't even have a computer. They've maybe borrowed a 10-year-old laptop from their uncle with an old operating system they don't even know how to use. And that can cause a lot of disconnect when we're teaching. So having usable interfaces is quite important. Now, our old pages did have quite a few problems with usability design. Our old page looked something like this. First and foremost was the navigation. Just getting into the page, it was kind of hard to tell where you needed to go. You have links up here, but as you click on them, you have more and more links. If you wanted to see what you had to do in a lab, you would go to the lab schedule, to the lab notes. You'd have a navigation on the bar on the side, you'd have a navigation bar on the top. For students that weren't familiar with navigating websites, I lost them quite frequently, quite easily, because they didn't know where to click to follow along. We also had a problem with some of our tabs being named the same. We would have basic CSS here, which was our notes, and we would have basic CSS here, which was an exercise. And if I just said click the basic CSS tab, we often lost them. Important information hidden behind multiple layers, which made it even harder to find. If they wanted to see their exercises, they had to go through a series of links like that. And perhaps one of the bigger problems as well was that the order these notes were written in often didn't match how we tried to teach it in the lab. So we would be jumping around between different tabs up and down in an order that didn't quite make sense. So for the first part of this project, I went through all of the other lab pages we have at the university. I checked out some university pages from, say, Waterloo and other online pages. I picked out the best features I could find across these pages and tried to come up with a different design that embodied those features. And I came up with this. So the main goal of this was that the information is presented in simple ways and is very easy to find. So all the important information is straight on the home page. We have who's teaching your course, we have our schedules, we have additional resources, and we have the actual links to the notes with the timelines here and reminders here. We have an automatically updating reminder here to tell students what week they're on and what they're doing that week. All you have to do is set a date at the start of the term, and it automatically updates which week it's on so that it can keep track of what the students need to be doing. In the labs themselves, the look was simplified a little bit. We rewrote the notes to match the order of how we teach. And to help with presentation, whatever tab you're on lights up so that it's easy for a student to visually see what part of the page you're on so that they can follow along better. We also wrote scripts and added code blocks to our pages. So beforehand, a lot of our pages didn't actually have what you needed to do in the lab as the exercise as part of the page. They either showed up and saw that or they didn't, which made it quite hard to catch up afterwards. So I added code blocks that show what you need to have to be done that page of exercise and what it should look like when you have it finished. And another reason for the code block was simply with people who aren't very good with technology and might not have a whole lot of technology for multiple screens, students in CS 100 were juggling between me reading this lab page to them, using Zoom to see me reading the lab page to them, using a text editor, and using a web browser to preview the page itself. So they would be juggling between 4 different pages, all the while I'm talking and can't see if they're keeping up or not. So what the code blocks allow is I can just copy this into an editor, explain what it does, and we don't have to worry about having to hunt down spelling mistakes with every student afterward. Our second concern with the categories was accessibility. Now, according to this article from Diverse Education, there has been an uptick of lawsuits with students with disabilities against colleges and universities since the pandemic started, because as things moved online, these barriers to students became much, much more apparent. Roughly 17 times increased since the pandemic started. And some of the main concerns that these students were bringing up was a lack of descriptive alt text on images. Alt text is what screen readers use to describe an image to somebody with vision problems if they can't interpret the picture themselves. A lot of PDFs are used. PDFs are great as a document, not so great for some screen readers. A lot of navigation and empty links on our pages make it both hard for people to use in general, but also the more ways that a student can have their device make a mistake because of the design of the page, the harder it is for the students to use assistive devices. And the last one is color schemes. Color schemes are very important to think about because if colors are too hard to read, then students have to find other ways of reading your pages. I know in a lot of our pages with the color schemes, I would just copy and paste the notes elsewhere because I couldn't read the text colors. And I'm sure I don't even have that bad of vision problems. So if we could look at one of our current pages right now, we can demonstrate what a lot of these problems might look like. This is our current 110 lab. And right off the start, you can see the font's quite small. It's not even using half the page. And we have light blue text on a white background, which is what I personally struggled with for all of our link colors, which does not meet minimum contrast settings. We also have a bad habit of relying on color to convey important information, which is an accessibility violation. For example, some of our notes rely on highlighting important information in red and green, but red and green would be the most common form of color blindness, which is a problem. Some of the language can be quite unclear and confusing, even for people who know what they're doing. If the notes are confusing, it's hard to teach them. Our screens for these pages don't resize well at all. If we check the mobile view, it might look something like this. This is a prediction where the navigation is very small. You wouldn't be able to tap on it. The font is very small. It actually looks worse on my phone when I check it because the navigation will stick out half the page and then you have to swipe left and right every time you try and read a sentence because it can't fit the whole page on the browser. So you're constantly having to swipe left and right in order to be able to read anything. Navigation's not very friendly for screen readers because frames, which makes it hard for them to access. And There's a certain reliance on mouse events. A mouse event in CS is simply something that you need to use your mouse to activate, such as clicking to reveal things or hovering over things. Like if there's an image and the image is small and you used hover mouse event to make the image larger, if you're aware that the image is too small to see, it would probably be easier just to make a larger image. So I did research through the W3 Accessibility Consortium. They have guidelines, they have principles, they have tutorials, and they have tools. For example, they have a complete list of tools that you use to test accessibility, such as one I made use of right here was the color contrast validator. All you had to do was you post the URL of your website into this color contrast evaluator, and it would tell you if your colors met standards or not. So we made use of tools like this, and we had some more improvements to our web design. So one concern was font being resizable without losing information. What that means is that students need to be able to increase the font without it breaking the page design like this. So you could rely on the page automatically resizing with zooming, but I wanted to make sure that as the page resized, I had control over it. So I put the text size in myself. It's also handy for presentations because the projectors aren't very big in the lab sometimes. So being able to increase the font size without increasing the entire page is quite nice. We set the minimum line spacing to 1.5. It's a requirement on every essay you write in university. It's not unreasonable to expect it on our web pages. Our links and targets are large and they're spaced out so that a student who might have fine motor disabilities who can't click on precise targets won't have trouble clicking on these links. We have two color themes. We have a light theme based on the old CS100 design, and we have a dark theme based on the UR courses design, roughly. And the color themes change anything on the page, so our code blocks also change between a light theme that was based on Notepad++ and a dark theme that was based on Replit. Our links always indicate where they go, and we make sure there are no dead links. So what that means is that we don't have links that just say click here. When you click a link, it has something like click here to see this, so students know exactly what it's going to do when they click on it. We have alt text on all our images. Our page size is reasonably well because we used percentages instead of measuring things in pixels. One of the main problems with our old site was that all of the positioning was measured in pixels, which is a size of measurement on computer screens. It's an individual square. The issue with that is every device has a different amount of pixels depending on the resolution, so it looks different on every device. By using percentages, it's a lot more consistent. Lastly, we placed roles on important navigation elements. A role simply tells a screen reader or a assistant navigator what the point of a certain box does. So this box would have a navigation role, so the reader knows that this is for clicking on links. This one has the content role so that it knows this is what it should be reading and things like that. A third category we considered then is portability. In computer science, the term portability means being able to use one piece of software across multiple different systems. So a portable system would be able to be used on Windows, Mac, Linux, mobile devices without being too much problem between them. In the first term I taught CS100, we had a lot of problems with these programs that we always had used for years, such as Notepad++, because Notepad++ was a Windows-only program, which worked great when we were in a Windows lab, did not work great when half of my students were on Macs and couldn't install it. In the first week of labs, I had to actually go and find replacements to the programs as I was teaching because half my students couldn't download the program that we had to use. Overall, it was difficult because even if students should be able to use a program, sometimes it just didn't run. Maybe they had an old operating system that couldn't use it. Maybe there was just something corrupt. I think our 110 lab actually teaches 4 different IDEs to do the same thing, which is just an absurd way of doing things. So One of the biggest changes we made in the last year for these labs is that we switched to either cross-platform things like Visual Code, or in the case of CS100 specifically, we switched to an online editor named Replit, which looks something like this. With Replit, it's browser-based, which means it works across multiple operating systems, even works on mobile devices, though I wouldn't recommend it. You just have your files on the left here. You have the page you want to edit here, and you have a preview screen here. So if a student is writing code, all they would need is to make an account, load this up, write what they want their page to say, hit run, and they can see a preview all from one window. So now instead of juggling 4 programs, they're juggling 1 and 2. They're juggling the Zoom window and Replit, and then maybe the lab page sometimes. Thanks to us getting the paid version of Teams in the university recently, we are also able to have students submit their files through this. So instead of using your course's submissions, or the way we did things before in CS100 was we had students upload everything to a public web server. And this caused all sorts of problems because it needed them to have their account set up properly. It needed them to drag the files into the right place. It needed them to set permissions. It needed them to name things properly. I couldn't just go and look at their submission. If they had any mistake in how they submitted it, I couldn't do anything to help them, except for try and guess what they did. But in Replit, I can see all their pages on the left. If I need to leave them notes, I can just leave a note like this. And we can preview and we can mark anything they need to do without downloading, and we see what they see because we're all using the same program. So there's not compatibility issues where it worked on one system and not another. And going forward, we're going to want to keep looking for portable or accessible programs like this one. It's made a pretty tremendous difference in just how we teach CS100 in general. Because instead of trying to have students who don't know how to use a computer use a Zoom screen share where you're telling them click here, click there, and they can't tell what you mean, you can just highlight and type in. There were a few concerns about switching to Replit that I've heard batted around the faculty a few times, and I wanted to address them too. The first I heard was that using a collaborative browser like this made it easier for students to collaborate with each other, which then would make it easier to cheat, which I understand that concern, but that would imply students weren't already collaborating in the first place. They were already sending screenshots. They were already sending files to each other. They could have already been using Replit without us showing that it existed. There was nothing that stopped them. So I don't think that's a very relevant concern. And the other one was that since it's web-based, it's unreliable. It might crash. You might not have it when you need to for the lab, which is another valid concern. And we did have a few problems in this last year where it was running slow or maybe went down for a few minutes. But we already had that problem even when we worked in the lab. We would have the lab websites crash all the time. We would have computers take over half an hour to log in reliably every single week, to the point some students were still trying to load the computer before we could, and we were already done teaching. I had that happen all the time. So I don't really feel like the reliability here is an issue either. Another one of the big concerns we had though was having extra examples and extra information. We have 1 hour to teach in a lab, and then we have to give the second hour for students to do the exercise so they actually have time. There's only so much you can teach in an hour, but there is a lot more that students might need to know. So one thing I added, 2 to 3 examples every week of extra information they might need to know. For example, we don't really have time to teach image alignment because it doesn't really come up that much, but students might need to know alignment for their class. We used a program called CodeMirror and a web preview to make live editing pages in our browser so that students can just come into this page and try out these things that we need them to know without us having to teach it. So for this one, it's image alignment. They can try it out like this. It will move the image around. This covers a gap that's been left between the course and the lab, where the course might assume the lab is teaching something, but the lab is not, and assuming the course is teaching something. If a student needs to know this, they can ask an instructor. We can link them to this page, and they can see how to do something. We also added an FAQ to our pages. Basically, I came up with a list of every question I can ever remember being asked more than once. And I listed them out and I listed solutions to them. So maybe students were having trouble with adding links to their pages. They could search our FAQ for link. And they can see, how do I do this? And we have an answer. They can ask for this, it shows how to do it. This is helpful not only for the students because maybe they're shy and don't want to have to ask the instructor for help, so they could just come and look at this, but it's also helpful for instructors because it can be hard to remember every single answer on the spot, but having just pre-written answers that you can either give students or email students if they've asked outside of class is also quite helpful. So our final concern with this was maintainability. Having all of these features would be quite tedious to make every single time because adding the code blocks, colorizing the text, it would be quite a bit of work if you had to write it out every single time. So the last thing we worked on were scripts to do it for us. And we have a template system here. So if you need to make a page, we have the page template. You start by copy and pasting this. If you wanted to add a table, we have a table template. You put how many rows and columns you want. You put what you want in those rows and columns. It will print out the code you need and you just copy and paste it into your page. This most useful ones we have of this is our code mirrors. Those were those code blocks and examples I was showing. Colorizing that cell by yourself would involve going through and putting span tags around every single word you wanted to stand out. But with this, you put in the code that you want to have made into a block. I could grab this. You paste it here. You give it an ID. You pick what language you want it in, if you want line numbers, if you want it to wrap the text, if you want students to be able to edit it. Click here. You copy and paste this onto the page and you would have that code block. And there's one for the nav bars. You could make our entire website that I have using this without ever having to write any HTML code yourself. So it definitely helps with maintainability and with the process of updating. I recently updated the 110 labs using this, and it took maybe, all I had to do was copy what was on the page into this template and resave it. It went quite quickly. So in closing, just to talk a bit about my experiences with teaching with this and how it's made changes to both my experience, my students' experience, and my TA's experience. I've been using this webpage about 1.5 years now, and it has made everything about our lab run smoother. So having labs that the students can easily follow along with, that match how we want to teach, that are easy to understand, that have examples, makes our job as instructors quite a bit easier, because having to make up how to explain things, having to look through the notes and saying, there's a gap here, I need to find something to fill it. You don't have to worry about that. Teaching in your 1 hour becomes important. There were several labs in 100 that we absolutely struggled to get through on our time limit. And now they're taking about half the time. My students follow along better. They don't get lost. They understand the content better, or at least they know how to ask better questions. It's easier to help them because I can just go look in a browser and see what they're doing instead of having to have them send me files or have them upload files and wait for them to load. It's easier to help students outside of class because if I get an email, I have maybe 10 students ask the same question. I can just put it in the FAQ, copy and paste that answer to them. And then I have that answer for if I ever see that question again. I've received personal thank yous for students with, or from students with disability letters about having a dark theme that they could actually read because they were physically struggling to read a lot of our web pages. And in terms of team management, it's made managing teams of TAs a lot easier because when we have a meeting, I can just give them a brief summary of what they need to do that week and then say, go watch the recording on the page. This is how I want you to teach it. Follow that video. Do what that video does. And it's made our labs a lot more consistent with who's teaching it how as well. And that, I guess, about wraps up this project.
Thanks, Devon. Does anybody have any questions for Devon?
Well, because I'm a lab instructor. Devon, where did you go to get the template generated?
Oh, this?
Yes.
I just had that on my own web page. I'm going to be moving it to our lab pages soon.
Oh, okay. Okay.
No one actually told me what they wanted to do with it because no one was using it.
I didn't know that it existed, so that's why.
Fair.
So would you be doing this with the other labs? I think like the ones that you're teaching, something similar?
Yeah, it is quite similar. I can show what we're doing with 110 right now. If I could find it. This is the preview we have of the 110 lab so far, and it's quite similar as you can see. It teaches a different language, so things like our code blocks will look different, but it can still all use the same. Like our code blocks will look slightly different because it's a different language, but overall it's all the same tools because of how I have it set up. So you just paste what you want into it and it will spit out what you need.
Okay. Great.
It looks great, Devon.
Thanks.
Yeah. I like the accessibility part because it's all of the things that taking into consideration the people with different needs.
Yeah, W3 had a lot of resources to help with that, where they just sort of had guidelines like you can go down the list and say, I need to make sure this is happening. I need to make sure I have this. And that can use these tools to like actually double check and see that you're following the rules. It was quite nice.
Cool. Okay. So, well, thanks, Devon, for your presentation. I'm going to just stop this recording.